Good day. After the dramatic events which followed the fall of Kabul, we have entered in the world of international politics what superficially appears to be a quieter period. We don't have the great dramas that we saw earlier this year, the apparent conflict that seemed to be about to explode in Ukraine, the talk of a coup in Belarus, and of course the events in Afghanistan. At the moment, the world seems quiet, but of course that quiet is only superficial. All sorts of things are actually going on. There is growing tensions and uncertainty about the direction of policies by Iran and about the state of the potential confrontations between Iran and the United States, for example. But perhaps the focus, the main area of international tension remains the Pacific region and specifically the South China Sea. And in fact, there's just been a recent report, not very well clarified, that the Chinese have again issued warnings to an American warship in the South China Sea that it was sailing too close to Chinese installations. But it is the actions of another country in the South China Sea and in the Pacific region which concern me. And that country is my own, and it is Britain. Now, I have spoken several times in various programs about what I see as the follies of British foreign policy at the moment. Back in May, we saw a British warship, June, British warships sailing around the Black Sea. One of them came dangerously close to the Crimea Peninsula and to Russian military installations there and was warned off by the Russian military, a fact which the British actually lied about. And then you had the bizarre spectacle of the British complaining loudly and vociferously about the American withdrawal from Afghanistan and claiming that they'd made attempts to rustle up some kind of European army to take over from the Americans in Afghanistan, and with the British complaining bitterly, not so much about the chaotic way in which the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, but rather about the supposed the withdrawal itself, with the supposed proof that this withdrawal shows that the United States can no longer be relied upon, and according to our Defense Secretary, Ben Wallace, that the United States is not even a superpower any longer. The last observation, by the way, is so ridiculous and so profoundly wrong that I'm not going to even comment about it any further. All I will say is that I would not be surprised if Americans hearing it found it deeply offensive. The British, for what it's worth, have never explained why they think the United States should have remained in Afghanistan indefinitely, or what they think the United States would have achieved by remaining in Afghanistan indefinitely, other than spending vast amounts of money dissipating its resources on some kind of fool's errand in Central Asia. But I say that because whilst the British are criticising the Americans for not engaging in a fool's errand in Central Asia, the British are engaging in various fool's errands of their own. As my viewers will remember, the British sent warships into the Black Sea earlier this year, and one of them even sailed incredibly close to the Crimea, and where it was threatened by the Russian Navy and had to pull away. And the British have also been sending their aircraft carrier, their lone aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth II, round the Pacific, though on this occasion it showed wisdom in staying away from Chinese installations. It has just apparently visited Japan. I would add that the Queen Elizabeth, though an aircraft carrier, not only is not remotely comparable to American Navy carriers, but bizarrely and incredibly lacks British aircraft, and therefore went on this long patrol with American aircraft from the US Marine Corps apparently operating upon it. In other words, what was intended to be a show of British power has turned out to be a show of British weakness. And the British are now following up with this foolish fool's errand in the Pacific by sending 2 river-class patrol boats, apparently on permanent patrol, on permanent station in the Pacific. These are 2 small ships, about 2,000 tons displacement each. They have a crew of about 40, and they're armed with nothing more powerful than light cannon and heavy caliber machine guns. They are inconsequential in terms of modern warfare. And I ask again, what exactly are these 2 warships? They're not even properly warships, they're more patrol boats. What exactly are they supposed to be doing there? They're obviously not going to impress the Chinese, and they're not going to impress the regional powers either. No one in the Pacific, Vietnam, for example, or the Philippines, is going to say to themselves, well, we should stand up to China because the British have sent 2 patrol boats into our part of the world. That is an absurd idea, and it is incredible that there still seem to be some people in Britain who insist on seeing things otherwise. Moreover, this deployment is taking place at precisely the same time when economic conditions in Britain are far from good. Already before the pandemic, British finances were becoming increasingly stretched, and the pandemic has massively added to the total bill. The result is that the British government yesterday, or at least the day before I've just made this video, announced large tax increases which bring the British tax burden back to the level it was in 1950. Britain now has the heaviest tax burden it has had for 70 years. All the reforms of Margaret Thatcher have been completely cancelled out. That is a remarkable fact, and it's astonishing that it's taking place under a Conservative government. And moreover, if one follows the British news, as of course I do, one will know that many British Conservatives are deeply unhappy and very angry about it. They are fortunate that the Labour opposition at the moment is so disorganised and so absorbed with its own internal conflicts that it is unable for the moment to capitalise on this extraordinary weakness and chaotic nature of British government policy. But at the same time that Britain's domestic problems appear to be getting bigger, the British insist, as I've said, in taking these very confrontational steps in places like the Pacific and the Black Sea. Well, I come back to my original point. Sending 2 patrol boats on permanent station to the Pacific will impress no one and will intimidate no one. On the contrary, there is a very real risk that these 2 patrol boats, that these 2 small ships, if there is ever a serious confrontation in the Pacific between China and the United States, will get themselves into serious trouble. The British, with no naval assets to speak of in the Pacific, and with Britain lacking the power, the military power, to project power seriously or in a meaningful way in the Pacific, will at that point be obliged to turn to its allies, which in the Pacific region means the United States, for help. The Americans will then have to come to Britain's rescue, something which they might not want to do, And frankly, I can very well see that at that point, the Americans and the British might find themselves in having rather tense conversations behind the scenes. I would add that at that point, the British will once again learn who is the superpower and who is not. The United States is most definitely a superpower, and let's face it, Britain is not. So what is the point of this deployment? Well, as I said, it's not going to impress anyone. And if the intention is to intimidate China, if the idea is to make the Chinese think that the British are a force to be reckoned with in the Pacific, well, it could not be further from the truth. And we've now had a long article by a Chinese analyst, Liu Xuanzun, in Global Times, commenting about this. And it says the following. The UK has sent less capable warships to the Asia-Pacific, which are no threat to the PLA. With 2 offshore patrol vessels setting up from a UK naval base on Tuesday, the country has reportedly started to permanently station its warship in the Asia-Pacific region at a time when the US is rallying its allies to the region in an attempt to contain and confront China. Armed with only light weapons, the UK ships are only showing off their presence after Brexit and making political statements that the UK bows to the lead of the US. And just like the ongoing tour of HMS Queen Elizabeth to the region, these vessels cannot yield any military significance or become a real threat to the Chinese People's Liberation Army. The HMS Tamar and HMS Spey left Portsmouth on Tuesday and set out for the Indo-Pacific region. The 2 UK warships' permanent deployment in Asian waters is arranged with China vying for influence with the US and Japan, according to a British statement, and amid growing alarm in recent months over China's territorial ambitions in the region, including Taiwan. From a technical point of view, these 2 warships will have minimal influence to the military power balance in the region and are of no military threat to China. These vessels have a displacement of 2,000 tons each, with a crew of just over 40 people respectively, with a 30mm cannon and other light defensive weapons. The UK vessels are neither capable of nor intended to affect the military balance in the region. Due to the small displacement and simple armament, this type of ship is only capable of carrying out non-traditional security tasks in coastal waters with limited comprehensive combat capability. Compared to China's Coast Guard ships, some of which have displacements of more than 10,000 tons, the UK ships have no advantage at all. Without being equipped with proper weapons like missiles, the UK ships cannot even put up a fight with some of China's most basic surface combatants, like the 1,300-ton class Type 056 corvette. Knowing this, the UK sent these ships to show off its presence as a global power after Brexit and to coordinate with the Indo-Pacific strategy of the US. Well, I come back to the point. What is the point of sending warships like this to the Pacific? Clearly, the Chinese, as I've just said, are not intimidated. Nobody in the region is going to be impressed. The idea that sending these warships to the Pacific is going to impress anybody in the Pacific or make them think that Britain is a global power is simply not going to happen, and imagining that it will is stupid. So what is the point and what is the purpose of this deployment? Well, I can't help but think that at some deep psychological level, the fact that economic problems in Britain are becoming ever more acute means that some people in the British government, presumably Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, but no doubt other officials, think they need to compensate for those economic problems by sending British warships to far-flung corners of the world. If so, that is a foolish strategy, and one which, as I've said, is only going to land us into trouble. Back in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher made no such mistakes. She did send a British task force to deal with an Argentine attack on the Falklands Islands, which she saw as a direct challenge to British interests. And though there were some murmurings of sending British warships to the Pacific in connection with the negotiations which were taking place at that time with China over the status of Hong Kong, Margaret Thatcher ultimately did no such thing. Always, ultimately, Margaret Thatcher understood that the priority for Britain was not sending warships on quixotic missions around the world. It was focusing on Britain's internal developments, where Margaret Thatcher carried out an extremely ambitious economic programme. Now, some people in Britain to this day question the rightness of Thatcher's economic programme. You will find many people say that it didn't strengthen Britain's economy overall, it weakened it. Others, of course, take the diametrically opposite view. But about Thatcher's the correctness of her priorities, of that there is no doubt at all. And I would add, she was not the first British Prime Minister to make that same sort of decision. Harold Wilson, her Labour predecessor, made exactly the same assessment in the 1960s. He judged that the major priority for Britain, what would make Britain a major power, was focusing and sorting out its domestic economic problems, and he refused to get Britain drawn into the war in Vietnam, and on the contrary, he pulled back Britain's military presence east of Suez. So there we are. That was the policy that British Prime Ministers have followed in the past. It is undoubtedly the correct one. The Johnson government is doing the opposite. It is reckless and it is foolish, and it can only land us into trouble, and into trouble which arguably we will have to turn to the Americans to get us out of. At this point, more than at almost any other time, with Brexit just done, with economic problems extremely severe in Britain itself, with Britain deeply polarised, with secessionist movements strong in Scotland and growing in Wales, the British need to focus instead on their economic problems at home. Sending gunboats to the Pacific might have been an impressive act in the days of Queen Victoria. Today, they have no relevance to British policy any longer. I hope and believe that sooner or later, someone in Britain will point that out. But for the moment, there is no wise person doing that at the moment. Well, thank you for this, for joining me for this short video on this topic today. I apologise for my rather strong language, or at least what is for me rather strong language, but obviously Britain is my own country and I feel particularly strongly about these things, as you can imagine. And I look forward to you joining me again in future programmes, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programmes with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. And I also would ask you to check out Alex's own channel. You'll find links under this video. But please, and first and above all else, come to our two other platforms First and foremost, locals, where we have a thriving community and where we are now publishing exclusive content that we feel nervous about publishing on other platforms like the main ones, the big tech ones. After all, we had a bruising encounter with PayPal, who has, as it says, permanently limited our accounts, including our personal accounts. So, of course, we have to wonder what's coming. And also SuperU as well, which we think is a great platform and which we will be developing more actively in the future. And also, if you want to support us, you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar. And remember to come to our shop by getting yourself there. The amazing things you will find there are great magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all the rest. And please also, if you've liked this video, remember to press the like button and to check your subscription to this channel. All sorts of strange things are happening to our subscription rates, by the way, which also make us wonder whether the events with PayPal were entirely coincidental. But anyway, please check your subscription to this channel. And if you want to subscribe, make sure that you are subscribed. Thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon, and have a wonderful day until then.